everyone. Welcome to Crime in Court. This is the 1996 Menendez brothers trial, California versus Erik and Lyle Menendez, on trial for the homicides of their parents, Kitty and Jose. We're nearing the very end of the state's case. So we are on part 26, and that's just how I've been breaking these videos down. We are on week 5, technically. So we're on week 5 and beginning week 5. We're starting with Robert Lawrence. You can actually see on the screen here underneath me. You can see Robert Lawrence, and he is the pathologist at the coroner's office. I'm going to shrink myself here. So, week 5, November 6th, 1995 is when we're starting. So if you're following along, that is where we're going to begin, is November 6th. And Robert Lawrence, pathologist at the coroner's office. And then he's going to be on the stand for 2.5 days. So it's going to be several videos of him. And then we're going to get into the mechanical engineer, Roger McCarthy. Detective Zoller will be recalled again, and then Roger McCarthy will be back on the stand, and and then Zoller again. So that will conclude their case. So we have like 3 more witnesses, technically: Robert Lawrence, Dr. McCarthy, and Detective Zoller. And then the defense's case will start on week 7. So we're nearing the start of the defense, and the end of the state's case here. So let's get started. Please hit the like button and let's dive in. So the court says, all right, in the trial, the defendants are here with their lawyers. The people are here. Is there anything before we have the jury come in? Mr. Khan for the state says, I have a lot of exhibits to mark, about 38 exhibits. I don't know if the court wants to do that now outside the jury's presence. The court says, well, if it's easier for you to do that. Miss Abramson says, I didn't know he was going to do this. We could have seen them. The court says, yes, if you want to mark them. Mr. Khan says, we have. We'll start with the x-rays that we'll be using. Each of the photographs and the x-rays have their own numbering on it, which was, the court says, we have a little bit of discussion in the audience here. It seems like every person who's sitting next to somebody is talking. Perhaps we can cut that out so we can proceed with things that are being said right here in court. Yes? Mr. Khan says, I'm sorry. Court says, go ahead. Mr. Khan says, each of the photographs and the x-rays have their own numbering on it, which was provided by Dr. McCarthy. So I think the easiest reference, rather than describe the photograph, would be simply to refer to the marking that is already on them. Ms. Abramson says, it would help if they were described so I can make a note and we can make a note for our evidence list as to what they are. The court says, one thing at a time. Let me hear what Mr. Khan is saying. Mr. Khan says the next one in order would be 167, that is one x-ray. If the court wishes me to describe the x-ray, I can do that. The court says no. Does it have a label on it? It does. It says one x-ray on it. Okay. 168 will be 2 x-ray. 169 will be 3 x-ray. 170 will be 4 x-ray. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, I can't make notes this fast, and since he's not describing them for the record, I have to know what they are, not just x-ray. So, if I can have a moment, and I just ask what is one x-ray? Which part of Mary Menendez's body is that supposed to be? Mr. Khan says that's the right shoulder. 171 will be 5 x-ray. 172 will be 6 x-ray. 173 will be 7. Okay, I'm not going to read all those. The court says 16. Yes. You're skipping 15. Yes, I'm skipping 15. 182 will be to Jose or Joseph, I should say. 183. Okay, he's going through all these. Ms. Amerson says, wait, slow down. Mr. Khan just keeps going with numbers. 198 will be 15 Mary. 199 will be 16 Mary. You get the point. 201 will be a photograph depicting the den of Jose Menendez sitting on the sofa. It is also labeled by Mr. McCarthy, one couch. 202 is a photograph 8.5 inches by 11 in size, which depicts Jose Menendez lying on his back in the coroner's office and the abrasions on his chest visible. 203 is a diagram. It's a skeletal chart which is labeled Mary Menendez internal injuries. 204 will be the doll or the mannequin representing the wounds inflicted to Jose Menendez. I think this is overkill. This is way too much, in my opinion. Like, and they argued that. We read through the argument that it was too gruesome, too grisly, and too repetitive. And that's the point I think the prosecution wants to make. And 205 is the doll or the mannequin representing the wounds inflicted to Kitty Menendez. That's all. That's all. The court says, okay, are we ready for the jury to come out? Mr. Khan says yes. The court says, okay, let's get the jury out. The jury entered the courtroom and the following proceedings were held. Ladies, the jury is in, says the court. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're here to resume with the trial, and the people will be calling their next witness. Mr. Khan says the people call Dr. Robert Lawrence. All right, so Dr. Robert Lawrence was called as a witness. He's sworn in, and direct examination begins. Mr. Khan, for the state, says, Sir, can you tell us what your occupation is? I'm a pathologist with the coroner's office in Stockton, California. And how long have you been a pathologist? 23 years. And how long have you worked for the coroner's office? Actually, I've worked for them about 23 years. I've been a pathologist probably another year or two beyond that. You are a doctor, sir? Yes. Can you tell us where you went to medical school? I graduated from UCLA Medical School in 1966. I then did my internship there at the UC Medical Center. I then entered the Navy as a flight surgeon taking care of pilots and their families. Oh, that's cool. And then took my residency or specialty training of pathology at the Mayo Clinic. I then entered practice in San uh, Wa- Joaquin County. Is that how you say it? I don't know. Or Stockton, California, and I've been there for the past 23 years. Okay, how long was your residency? 4 years. So that is 4 years following medical school. That's 4 years of pathology specialization training after medical school. Yes, sir. Sir, can you tell us what a pathologist is? A pathologist is a physician who performs autopsies for the purpose of determining the cause and circumstances of death. And can you tell us how many autopsies you have conducted in the course of your career? About 7,000. And what does an autopsy consist of? It begins with an external examination of the body and then a complete internal examination. That is, opening all of the body cavities, the head, the chest, and the abdomen, removing all of the organs, dissecting the organs, and so forth. And then, on some occasions, doing microscopic examination on tissue samples that are saved, and also saving samples for toxicology, blood specimens, urine, and so forth. And have you testified as an expert witness in the past? Yes, sir. Can you tell us how many times you've testified as an expert witness? Several hundred times. Several hundred? How old is this guy? I don't know. He's done 7,000 autopsies and he's uh, apparently testified in court as an expert several hundred times. Is he exaggerating or is it true? I don't know. What do you guys think? Now, as part of your preparation in this case, did you review some documents? Yes, sir. What documents did you review? I reviewed records from the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, including an investigative report and autopsy reports on the two victims. Did you also review some photographs as part of your preparation for your testimony? Yes. Can you tell us what you viewed in that regard? There were photographs of the death scene and photographs of the autopsy. There were also photographs of x rays taken after death. Did you also review, as part of your preparation, illustrations from a company by the name of Failure Analysis? Yes. Now, sir, after reviewing those documents and supporting material, did you form an opinion concerning the cause of death to the person who was described in the autopsy report as Mary Louise Menendez? Yes, sir. And did you also form an opinion concerning the cause of death for the person described in the autopsy report as Joseph or Jose Menendez? I did. And will you tell us, sir, what the cause of death were for those two individuals? Both victims died from multiple gunshot wounds. Now, as part of your preparation in this case, did you also prepare physical exhibits to illustrate to the jury the wounds that were inflicted in this case? Yes. And can you tell us what you did in that regard, sir? I started with artists, mannequins, small dolls that can be moved and postured, and I duplicated to the best of my ability the locations and directions of the gunshot wounds to the body. I then drilled holes in those body parts with the proper direction and inserted rods and glued them in place so that we now have he's a medical doctor and this is not this doesn't seem like this is a credible experiment, if you ask me. So he drilled holes in the body parts of the dolls with the proper direction and inserted rods and glued them in place so that we now have dolls that show the various shots and from what angles. I don't know if this is proper or properly done. How do we know? This needs to be really, his methods and methodology really needs to be looked at there. All right, so next question. Okay, I have a number of exhibits which we have marked outside the presence of the jury, and I would like to show you, first of all, the exhibit that has been marked as 204 for identification. Sir, can you tell us what that is presently before you? This is the mannequin depicting the wounds of Jose Menendez. And did you prepare that exhibit? Yes. Also, or I'd also like to show you another exhibit which has been marked as 205 for identification. Sir, I wonder if you would tell us if you recognize that exhibit. 205 is the mannequin representing Mary Menendez. Now, before we get into a detailed explanation of each of the wounds, I wonder if you would tell us generally, sir, what was your findings concerning the wounds inflicting to the bodies of Jose and Kitty Menendez? First of all, both. Miss Abramson says, Your Honor, I'm just going to object that that question is so huge we could get a 3-hour narrative answer. The court says, Did you intend to give us a 3-hour answer? The witness says, No, sir. Court says, Okay, overruled. Okay, but he could narrow the question, but whatever. The witness says both of these victims were in good health. There was no medical condition capable of causing death. Both of them were killed by multiple gunshot wounds, or shotgun wounds, I should say. Jose was struck 4 times and Mary was struck with 9 blasts. Starting with Jose, he was hit in the elbow. Another one perforated his right arm. Ms. Abramson says, Excuse me, Your Honor, if the witness is going to demonstrate, I have to see him. The court says, You certainly can stand up and move. Ms. Abramson says, Thank you, Your Honor. The witness says he was struck in the left elbow. He had a large perforating wound of his right upper arm. He had an explosive contact wound to the back of the head. This was the lethal wound, and he also had a large perforating wound in the left thigh. For Mary Menendez, she was struck in a total of 9 times. I don't think that that's ever been established. I know that the number of wounds because of the type of because it was the gunshot and the type of ammunition, you can't tell which wounds which. So you can't actually say she was shot this many times. And I thought that they wanted to say it was like 14, shots altogether. Now we were at 9 and whatever, I don't know. So for Mary, she was struck a total of 9 times. I should mention that there were 2 types of shotgun shells involved here. Most of the shots were due to buckshot, which are, as I've explained before, so you've got your casing, and inside you've got pellets in there and wadding and whatever else. But the pellets are what get released and they go, they explode out into all different directions. So buckshot would have less pellets and bigger pellets. So there's more or less in there, and they're because they're larger, so they take up more room. Birdshot is the other type that he's going to say, which has smaller pellets, much smaller pellets, and there's many more. So those can do a lot more damage to something uh, large like a human. They're for birds to make, an impact on the bird because, they fly and yeah, but and they're small, but compared to a human, you've got all these little tiny wounds then from the bird shot. So it both are equally very damaging to a human and make it seem more gruesome and brutal of a crime than it actually was, I think. And I think that they try to play that up a million times for the jury. So just be aware of that. All right, so all of Jose's were buckshot, 7 of Mary's were buckshot, and 2 were from birdshot. So we can assume maybe that Erik had the birdshot in his shotgun starting out. So starting with the buckshot wounds on Mary, because that's where he was standing in the room. Starting with the buckshot wounds on Mary Menendez, she was struck in her left breast area from the side. That could have come from Lyle too, if he was shooting from the side and he got his mom first and not his dad, perhaps, if his dad was just not in the way or something. I don't know. Could have got his dad too and then went through him, perhaps. Sorry for being gross. I just, I like to know the mechanics and how things work. So if it's too much, I apologize. All right, up next, he says she was struck from the front in her right face, another through her right hand, and on into her collarbone area on the right side. Another that went through her forearm and upper arm to both of those shot and so that both of those shots were received when the hand was held up against her chest. And then there was a perforation of her right thigh and 2 wounds of her left thigh and 2 wounds of her left knee area. Finally, the birdshot wounds were one that went up through her left shoulder and struck her in the left side of her face, and the other was a contact wound in the left cheek. The muzzle was held against her cheek, and a birdshot was fired into her head. I thought that they had buckshot in the back, or maybe I don't know. So both was because Lyle reloaded and came back and shot her in the face, in the head. And I thought that would have been buckshot, but I guess not. All right, Mr. Khan says, all right, let me go through that a bit more slowly with you at this time. I'll start first with a wound that you described to the head of Jose Menendez. You described that as an explosive contact wound. Can you tell us, first of all, what is meant by the term a contact wound? A muzzle of a shotgun was in contact with the back of his head when it was fired. And what do you mean when you say an explosive contact wound? The tissues looked as if a small explosion had occurred inside the head. The skin was blown out to create a large star-shaped defect. The skull was completely shattered. The brain was pulverized. Much of it fell out when the body was moved, and so forth. Extremely destructive wound. All right. I'm going to put up on the board 3 exhibits that we have already marked, 2 X-rays, which have been marked 180 and 181, and a photograph which has been marked 185. Directing your attention first to the photograph, there appears to be at the back of the head a large hole. Can you tell us what you meant by that term stellar? That term star-shaped. And what we see is a gaping hole that splits of this with splits of the skin that radiate out from it. And can you tell us how you can determine either from the photograph or from the other materials that you relied upon, for example, the autopsy report, that that was in fact a contact wound in which the muzzle was placed to the back of the head? The autopsy report and the photographs reveal that there was a circular defect. When the edges of the skin are pulled together, as one can see a circular defect that matches the size of roughly the size of a barrel. And there are no shot pellets off to the side, so that would be a very close range and very likely a contact wound. Was there anything about any material that was recovered inside the head that would also support the conclusion that this was in fact a contact wound? Yes. The portions of the shell called the wadding, which are plug like structures inside the shotgun shell, were recovered from inside the head, and this is also consistent with a very close range or contact wound. Okay, now that photograph that depicts the back of the head of Jose Menendez at the time of the autopsy, is that correct? Yes. Now, depicting or directing your attention to the two x rays that are up there on the board at this time, 180 and 181, can you tell us what those x rays depict? They show the head of Jose Menendez with the extensive and explosive fractures of the skull. Now, inside, is that two views of the head from two different directions? Yes. And inside those x-rays, can you see what would be the shots in this case? That is the pellets that come out of the shotgun when it is fired. Yes. There are the small white structures. They show up more than anything else. So they're showing an x-ray of Jose's skull, and you can see the pellets in the x-ray apparently. So let me give you a pointer. Perhaps with a pointer, you might be able to reach that. There's a cluster of buckshot, he says, in the neck area, the jaw area, and then several up inside the head. All right. Right now, you're pointing to the exhibit that has been marked as 180 for identification. I'm sorry, 181, which is the frontal view of the head. It appears in that photograph that a lot of the bright white area appears to be low in the face area and the jaw or the teeth. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, I'm going to object to counsel testifying. The court says, well, he's just asking a question at this point, overruled. Mr. Khan says, can you tell us what that bright white area represents? The witness says, a cluster of shot, a cluster of shot. Okay, now does the fact that the wound to the back of the head was where it is depicted in that photograph near the top of the head and the shot is found somewhere lower in the head, does that tell you anything about the direction of the shot that was fired? Yes, it does. Actually, the presence is about halfway up the back of the head, right in this area on people's, that's 180. 180. And the main massive shot ends up down more or less in the throat area. There's a downward direction from back to front, it goes downward. All right, thank you. You may return to your seat. You indicated, sir, that that shot was a buckshot wound? Yes. And you can tell, and can you tell us if if that wound would be immediately a fatal wound, that is, a wound that would cause death instantly? Yes, it would be. Was there any exit wound associated with that particular wound? No. Do you recall seeing in the autopsy report some reference to an injury in the right side? Do you have a copy of the autopsy report with you? Yes, not with me. Now that you mention that, it does refresh my memory, and there was a pellet exit described in the right side of the temple, but no major exit wound. Most of the pellets stayed inside the head. That's interesting. To be up close and there's no like exit wound. You would think that there would be enough force and pressure up close that there would be, but not in this case, apparently. All right, at this time, I would like to show you some additional photographs. You described for us a wound that was observed in the area of Jose Menendez's right arm. Can you describe that wound further in terms of the size, the exact placement of that particular wound? This wound was located in the mid right arm area, roughly halfway between the elbow and the shoulder. It consisted of two large, ragged, gaping defects, one on the front inside of the arm and the other on the back and outside of the arm. This is the only wound on out of all of the wounds in which I'm not sure about the direction. I'm not sure if it went from front to back or front or back to front. All right. Let me show you at this time the two photographs. One has been marked 183 for identification, and the other is photograph of an X-ray that has been marked 175. The court says, "What was the X-ray?" Mr. Khan says, 175, Your Honor. The court says, "And the other exhibit?" 183. I also have another photograph which has been marked as 202, and I'll place this on the board as well. Now, directing your attention first to the photograph that has been marked 183, that is the photograph to your right. Can you tell us what we are looking at there? 183 shows the right arm wound with the arm held out in front of the body. Okay, now you described two identifiable wounds on that arm. Can you, using the pointer, perhaps you can reach that far and point to the two rounds that you were referring to? This is the wound on the What we're seeing here is the wound on the front inside of the arm, and we're barely seeing part of the wound on the back outside of the arm, up higher and on the outside. Okay. Now, were the sizes of those wounds described in the autopsy report? Yes, I'd have to look at the report to refresh my memory on the exact size. And you've indicated for us that you are unable to determine the direction of the wound. Can you tell us, first of all, how you ordinarily the speaker fell from the witness stand. The court says, "Just leave it there." The witness says, "I'm going to have to pay for this." Maybe he moved his hand or moved and it fell. I don't know. The court says, "Why don't you just put it on the floor? We're not using it now." Mr. Khan says, "Can you tell us, first of all, how you ordinarily determine the direction of a wound?" With a shotgun wound at close range, the pellets will hit the body in a group and they will form almost a cookie cutter type of punch out hole. And as they start to spread, the markings of the hole will become scalloped. And the key to determining an entrance wound of this type is looking for places where the shot scrapes the skin as it goes in and it produces what we call an abrasion rim or an abrasion collar. So if it's a very close range wound, you'll see a cookie cutter round hole with a thin rim of abraded or scraped skin at the edges. If it's a little further away, you'll see a larger defect and you may see scalloping, sort of curved areas at the edges. And I look for those in this wound in the photographs. I did not do the autopsy, so I didn't have the body to look at. But on the photographs, I thought I could see some scalloping in one area on the one front of the arm, which suggests that it came from the front out towards the back. On the other hand, there's a line or linear abrasion just above the wound on the point of the arm that looks like a buttress mark. And I'm going into technical terms, but what it is, it's a scraping due to the skin flying out as the shot passes through and the skin strikes something. In this case, probably his shirt sleeve. So, on one hand, we have a suggestion that the wound goes from the front to the back because of the possible scalloping that I saw and abrasion. On the other hand, we have a possible back to front direction because it seems like the skin flew out and struck the shirt sleeve and it caused a linear abrasion so it's a difficult wound to interpret. So both sides could be both sides of the wound you could interpret to be either or. Okay, now as far as that buttressing wound that you just described to us, If that wound was front to back, could you tell us what could account for that wound that you refer to as a buttressing wound? There is a possibility that that buttress mark could be caused by the shot passing through his clothing and carrying the shirt with it, and therefore pulling the shirt sleeve violently across the skin that uh it across the skin it as goes on through. What? I'm reading the words on the page. That's probably not what the witness said, but that's what's there. So it may be that that direction is from front to back, and the buttress abrasion is caused by the shirt being pulled by the shot as it passes through. Now, did you observe any of the wounds to the body of Jose Menendez that are consistent with a shirt being pulled violently across the body? Yes. And what did you observe in that regard? The abrasions that are shown in the photograph at the bottom, I'm afraid I don't know the number. And Mr. Khan says that is 202. He says in 202, these multiple irregular brush abrasions on the right rib cage area, and those are due to cloth, and because of the circumstances, it's undoubtedly due to the shot grazing the shirt and pulling the shirt violently against the skin as it goes on through and causing the shirt to scrape the skin. Okay, and directing your attention to the middle photograph, that is photograph of an x-ray that has been marked 175, can you tell us what is depicted in that photograph? 175 shows the right upper extremity of Jose Menendez with a fracture and several pellets in the area of the wound depicted in the photograph, and also some additional pellets down in the forearm area, which are from a separate wound that we have not talked about. And that was several discrete pellet wounds in the in the fleshy part of the forearm. Okay, depicting your attention to the photograph at the bottom, 202, do you see those separate discrete wounds that you are referring to just a moment ago? Yes, yes, you do. They are situated below and just off to the side from the main hole. There are the separate pellet marks accounting for the pellets seen in the x-ray. And this break or fracture that is depicted in the X-ray marked 175, does this area of the break or fracture correspond to the area of the wound that you have described? Yes, it corresponds to the large ragged wound seen in the upper arm. So the arm's broken or fractured, and it correlates to that wound. Was the wound also a wound that was caused by buckshot? Yes, sir. And in that x-ray that has been marked 175, we see the round circular shapes. Are those buckshot pellets in that x-ray? Yes, sir. Now, sir, can you tell us what the terms antemortem, perimortem, and postmortem are? They're terms that indicate at what time with respect to death the wounds occurred. Antemortem wounds occurred while the person was still alive. Postmortem after they're dead. Perimortem means when they are in the process of dying and they have low blood pressure and or are going into shock and so forth. So far, you have described the wound to the back of Jose Menendez's head and now the wounds that appear to the right arm. Can you tell us when, in relationship to his death, each of those wounds took place? Not for sure because it's difficult with shotgun wounds. They can be tricky to interpret. That's because the blood vessels sometimes have some degree of pressure in them even after death, especially in lower parts of the body in the body if the body is erect, standing upright. So that when you explode the vessels with a shotgun wound, even after death, sometimes you'll get hemorrhage in the tissues and make a wound look like it's antemortem. So the way we describe antemortem versus postmortem is we look for hemorrhage in the tissues that are injured. If there's hemorrhage in the tissues, then we think that the heart was beating at the time of the injury. In the case of Jose's wounds, we know that any wound after his head wound would probably be postmortem and his heart would beat maybe a few times or maybe 30 seconds at the most after that wound. But all of his wounds, the wounds on the arm, looks antemortem. It looks as if he was alive, as if it was hemorrhage on its path. Again, I've been fooled. So even though they all may look like he was alive when they happened, he could be wrong. When you say hemorrhage along its path, you're referring to bleeding along the wound. Yes, the muscles are shredded and there's actual hemorrhage in the shredded muscles, blood seeping into the injured tissues. And how do you make that determination? Do you look for redness in the wound itself? Yes, you look for an abnormal dark purple red color of the tissues. In other words, does it look like raw meat or does it look like raw meat with currant jelly in it? This guy, gross. There's a difference in the appearance, he says. Obviously, we get the picture. We understand what he means now. Okay, so from what you can tell, the wound to the back of Jose Menendez's head would be what type of wound in terms of time of death? That would be antemortem. So again, that's me when he was alive. And the wounds that you see to his right arm, that would be what would they be? It appears to be antemortem. It may not be, but if I had to make a choice, I would select antemortem. Let me show you two more photographs at this time. A photograph depicting the left arm that has been marked 184 and photograph of an x-ray that has been marked 177. Now, sir, in addition to the wounds to the right arm, you also described a wound to the left arm. Can you tell us what that wound consisted of? This is a wound of his left elbow, and as you can see, it consists of several discrete pellet marks instead of a big single ragged defect. So this is much more a distant wound compared to the others that I've described. This would be several feet away from the body, even perhaps up to 10 to 12 feet away. That's if there's no intervening targets, as long as the shot went directly from the muzzle to him, we're talking about a range of somewhere feet up to maybe 10 to 12 feet. Now, as far as the ray that has been marked 170, the x-ray, sorry, that has been marked 177, can you tell us what is depicted in the x-ray? The x-ray shows several buckshot pellets in the same area we've been talking about, the left elbow, and a fracture of the forearm elbow, the ulna. Now, you described the wound to Jose Menendez as consisting of 4 shots. Have you formed an opinion as to whether the wound to Jose Menendez's left arm could have been caused by the same gunshot blast that caused the injury to his right arm? Part of the right arm wound could be from the same blast. So it could be the same shot. Those separate pellet marks separate from the big ragged wound, the wounds that were a little bit further down on the arm. Those could be a continuation of the shot that hit his elbow as it went across his body. So you cannot tell us how many shots hit him, basically. How many shots made the wounds on his body. As far as the single gaping layer wound, I'm not sure. It's possible, but I tend to think not. It looks like a close range wound. So you do rule out that possibility of it. I can't rule it out, but I tend to think not. All right. In addition to those wounds that you've described so far to the arms, you also described a wound to the leg of Jose Menendez. Can you tell us what type of wound that was to the leg of Jose? Let's listen carefully because Nathan Hockman, who is a tool, has repeatedly said that they took out their kneecaps, both of their kneecaps, to make it look like a mafia head. So let's see what Trial 2 says about this is the medical pathologist who he's not the one who did the autopsy, mind you, but he reviewed many photographs and x-rays. So here's what he says on his leg. He says this was a perforating wound on his left thigh, entering on the top right and exiting the left side. So it's a thigh wound. It was his thigh, not his knee. And it clearly says left thigh on the top right side and exiting the left side. So there you have it. On the board, I have placed photographs 182 and 176. Now, as far as the direction of the wound that is depicted in 182, the color photograph, can you tell us how you determined the direction of the wound being from inside the leg to the outside of the leg? This wound shows a good example of the scalloping that I was trying to describe earlier. If you look on the inside of the leg, you'll see curved areas with a scalloped pattern and some abrasion to the skin edges. This is consistent with an entrance wound, and therefore the larger defect on the outside is the exit. Okay. And what type of shot was it that caused this particular wound? Buckshot. And directing your attention to the x-ray that has been marked 176, can you tell us what we're looking at there? We're looking at the shattered femur or leg bone due to the gunshot wound. And is that the location of the fracture? Is that the location of that fracture correspond to the injury that is apparent in the color photograph that has been marked 182? Yes. It's a fracture of the lower left thigh in the same area as the gunshot wound. Now, did you form an opinion concerning whether this particular wound was antemortem, perimortem, or postmortem? So he's going to say this was postmortem. And what causes you to conclude that? From the wound itself, it's, as I said earlier, difficult to tell. So it's difficult to tell, so he can't be sure. But he's going to say it was postmortem because he wants you to think that this was a mafia hit. Like he made it look like a mafia hit. So it looks as if it has hemorrhage along its path, and this was described, but there's a scene photograph that shows him sitting on the couch with the wound, and there is no evidence of active bleeding around this wound. There's no active bleeding on to the couch, onto the floor, and it clearly, therefore, is a post-mortem wound. Sir, if they were standing and it happened while he was standing and then laid down or sat down on the couch after the shot, seconds after the shot happened, maybe there wouldn't be so much bleeding. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but I don't think that that is clear evidence of anything. All right. I'm going to show you a photograph that has been marked as 201 for identification. Did this photograph assist you in making the determination as to whether that wound was post-mortem? Yes. This is the photograph that I was referring to, 201. Is it? Yes. So you see his left leg rotated out to his left, and you can see the area of wounding. And there's just a little bit of blood that's trickled and fallen down to the couch, a little bit that's pulled onto the carpet underneath, about the amount you would expect if you took freshly killed meat and shattered it and then held it somewhere. A certain amount of the blood would drip off of the meat, even though there's no heartbeat. This guy is fully on graphic. There's certainly no evidence of active arterial bleeding. As you can see in the x-ray, the femur was shattered, and this would have caused injury of significantly of large blood vessels, and there would have been active squirting, hemorrhage, and so forth. So, if this would have been before death, we'd see much more blood around it and the floor and so forth. All right. Turning to the wounds that were observed to the body of Mary Louise Menendez, I would like to place up on the board for you a diagram of a skeletal frame. As I show you those photographs, I'm going to place on the board a color photograph that has been marked 196 along with two X-ray photographs that have been marked 171 and 174. Now, you describe, sir, a wound to the left cheek of Mary Menendez. Can you tell us what type of wound that was? And can you point to it with a pointer there? This wound to the left cheek is a circular hole with a collar of abrasion around it, and this then is a contact entrance wound. Once again, by contact wound, is that a wound that was inflicted when the muzzle was placed directly to the skin at the time that the shot was fired? Yes. Once again, how can you determine for that particular wound that that was, in fact, a contact wound? Several things. Number one, the size of the entrance hole, the presence of the circular abrasion collar, the presence of gunshot residue on the skin around the wound because all the powder went through the skin and into the head. None of it was on the outside, showing a fairly tight contact, and the presence again of wadding material deep inside the head. These are all consistent with a contact wound injury or contact entrance wound. What type of shot was used for that particular wound? That was birdshot wound. Uh, that was different from most of the others. And how was it different that that shot was, in fact, a birdshot wound? Or how was it determined? Sorry. How was it determined that that shot was, in fact, a birdshot wound? Birdshot were recovered from within the wound path, and you see them on the x-ray. All of those smaller dots concentrated in this area, but also seen around the area of the entrance and in the lower face as well, up in the back of the head. All of the smaller dots are the birdshot. She was also shot with another birdshot in the left face, and some of those are mixed. So you were just now pointing to the x-ray photograph that was marked 171 and that depicts the left side of the head. Is that correct? Yes, but the x-ray goes all the way through, so you see pellets on both sides. Okay, 174 is the x-ray at the bottom on the board there. Can you tell us what that x-ray depicts? You see fractures involving the facial bones. You see some buckshot pellets, these larger white structures, and you see hundreds of birdshot pellets. Those are both from the side of the face and the contact wound in her left cheek. Okay. Now, are there also buckshot pellets that are apparent in that x-ray photograph as well? Yes, there are. Well, we'll get to that later. Now, can you tell us, just looking at the x-rays of the head of Mary Louise Menendez, where in the skull there were fractures? Everywhere. All of the facial bones were shattered. The skull was shattered. The base of the skull was in many pieces. There were just extensive fractures throughout the head, as one would expect. So that's why I think people say, oh, it's so gruesome. Well, yeah, it's because of the ammo that they're using and the type of gun that they're using. It's not like, if they had used handguns, the effect still would have been the same. Their bodies just wouldn't have been so badly damaged. So to get them on, well, so gruesome and so brutal and whatever, like, I don't get it. Yes, that's what happened when these are the damages that happen to a human body when you use a shotgun. That doesn't mean it's any more gruesome than using a handgun. I mean, the crime itself. You're still committing the crime, and the end result is the people are dead. So whether you use a handgun or a shotgun, a knife, they're all the same thing. You all get the same result. So I don't know why brutality or the level of brutality came into this trial as much as it did and still gets argued to this day. I just wonder. I don't know. People aren't critical thinkers sometimes. Anyways, the next question. All right. At this time, if you would go to the board and just indicate, perhaps with that red marker, I'm going to ask you to mark where there were fractures to the skeletal frame of Mary Louise Menendez, and you would just indicate with a red marker where you observed the fractures to the head. I'm drawing multiple fractures about the head and face, says the witness. Mr. Khan says, okay. The witness continues, there was a fracture on her left, correction, her right collarbone area. There was a larger fraction on the right arm bone. There was a fracture of the forearm also. Mr. Khan says, I don't know if those x rays are visible to the jury. Perhaps you can make them a little larger so the jury can see them. The witness says there were also shattering fractures of the hand on the right side. She had a fracture of her left femur, fracture of the left lower leg. There was also a fracture in the left shoulder, and that's pretty much it. I'd have to review the x rays to see if I'd skipped anything. Thank you, sir. You may return to your seat at this time. Now, as far as the direction of that wound is concerned, by looking at the photograph that has been marked 160 or 196, as well as the two x-rays, they're 171 and 174, are you able to determine anything about the angle at which the weapon was placed to the face of Mary Louise Menendez at the time that the shot was fired? A direction in front to back and possibly slightly upward, and it may be a little bit. I try to look at my doll. I think it's pretty much straight on. Okay. So the shot that you're referring to on the doll would be this one right here. Correct. This is the one on the left-hand side of her face. And how are you able to determine that by reference to the x-rays photo and the autopsy report? The x-ray shows the main shot mass located. I'm talking about the bird shot mass located in the area, which is roughly level where the entrance hole is. The front to back view. I'm sorry, yes, the front to back view shows the shot pretty much concentrated near the midline or maybe a little off to the left side. Again, consistent with pretty much straight in. These directions aren't precise. As you can imagine, we're just giving a rough idea. We're not talking about a single projectile and two holes. We're talking about many holes, and they destroy the structures. Now, as far as the lethality of this particular wound, would this wound be immediately fatal? Probably very rapidly fatal. Not necessarily immediately fatal, but within a matter of moments. Yes, sir. Placing three more photographs on the board for you at this time, which have been marked 188, color photograph 195, color photograph, and 170, an x ray photograph. Now, you just finished describing one of the birdshot wounds. That is the shot to the left cheek. Where was the other birdshot wound? Through the left shoulder on into the left side of her face. All right. There in photograph number 188, we have what appears to be the left shoulder. Would you describe that wound there? This is an explosive gaping defect with portion of abrasion collar recognizable on the lower margin and a pushing up and lifting and shredding of the tissues as the shot mass passes upward on into the left side of the face, seen in pupils number, Mr. Khan says that is 195. 195 with birdshot injury to the left side of the face. Can you tell us what is depicted in the bottom x-ray that has been marked 170? It shows birdshot pellets and fractures in the left shoulder area. Now you said that concerning the top photograph 188 there was a pushing up. What do you mean by pushing up? The shot mass entered in the lower portion of the wound in an upward direction, shattered and pushed the tissues ahead of it as it went upward towards the face. Are you able to see that the tissue in a position that it appeared to have been pushed up? Yes. And how did you determine that by looking at a photograph? It just looked that way. Oh, that's scientific. The tissue here appears to have been pushed up. Really? I certainly hope that the defense pushes back on that. Okay, it's not very scientific. That's what I just said. Is that the reason why you associate the wound that is depicted in 188 as being part of the same wound as is depicted in 195? Yes, sir. That's one of the reasons. Okay, are there other reasons why you associate those two wounds together? The entrance wound to the left side of the face has some atypical features. The pellets have an irregular distribution and it just looks like a wound where the pellets have passed through something else on the way. And you'll notice that the pellet marks are further apart than they are in the entrance wound on the shoulder. So again, it's like billiard balls. If they strike something first, then they tend to spread before they hit the next thing. All right. And in the x-ray that has been marked 170, can you see the birdshot in that x-ray that is the bottom one on the left-hand side? 170, can you see birdshot in the x-ray? Yes, they're concentrated in the shoulder area. And the fracture that you're referring to that shoulder area, where do you see that fracture? Actually, the fracture is down here in the upper arm. I see. Right here, or right where the entrance would be. All right, you've described two of the shots to the head area, both being birdshot. I would like to show you another photograph that has been marked 194 and direct your attention to a wound which has been described as a penetrating wound on the right. Ms. Amerson says, I'm going to object to counsel reading someone's description unless it's the witness who so described it. Sustained. All right. So you described a wound in this figure that has been marked as 205 as being a wound to the area of the right eye. Can you tell us what type of wound that was? This, Ms. Abramson says, may I approach, Your Honor? The court says yes. The witness says this is a penetrating buckshot wound to the right side of the face involving the eye and the cheek. Mr. Khan says, okay. And can you tell us what was the full parameter or scope of that particular wound to the area of the right eye? I'd say it's about a 4-inch area, and it struck the area of the right eye. Any other parts of the face other than the right eye? The nose, the upper portion of the cheek. And what type of shot was used for that wound? Buckshot. And you've identified in the x-rays that have been marked as 171 and 174 locations where you observed buckshot. You also see buckshot in those x-rays. Yes, you do. Here they are concentrated in the face area of 173. Is it 173? Yes. That's 171. 171. And in the box, the bottom x-ray, they are seen in the forehead and in the mid portion of the face as well, also down around the mouth. Are those buckshot that is apparent in the x-ray buckshot that you contribute to that wound to the bright eye of Mary Louise Menendez? I didn't hear the question. Yes, the buckshot that you have been pointing to in those x-ray photographs is that buckshot that you attribute to the wound that I have just the wound that is depicted in the photograph 194 that I have just placed on the board. Yes. Now that wound, can you tell us if that wound it was a direct on hit to the face or whether that was at an angle? Probably angled a little bit toward her left, pretty much horizontal and a little bit toward her left. And how were you able to determine that? By the shot path that was described at the time of the initial autopsy and also by the appearance of the x rays. And would that wound be immediately fatal? Probably not, but it could be quite rapidly fatal, say a matter of minutes. So they're trying to make it seem like none of these shots to her head would have killed her, even though they did extensive damage and she would have been, they're trying to make it seem like she'd be lying there for a while or at least some amount of time. I think that's what they're trying to portray here. Anyway, so I think this is kind of a good place to stop because I just, scheduling wise today, I don't have a ton of time to record, but I wanted to get you guys an episode. So I hope you enjoyed your Memorial Day weekends if you are in the United States and watching. for somewhere else. I hope you had a good weekend. um, and we are uh, I'm like I said, I'm gonna keep trying to do these videos like daily or every other day. So, um, I took Memorial Day off, but I'm gonna try to get you a video, maybe probably every day this week, other than Monday. So they're shorter, but we're gonna give you more content throughout the week. So, I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for watching, and I feel like there was an announcement I wanted to make, but I can't remember. Oh, definitely, don't forget, if you haven't done so already, write to the parole board. I don't have the info with me because I forgot to grab it. So I will have it for you in the next episode. To remember to write the parole board a letter of support for Erik and Lyle, a letter of recommendation. I believe you have to write a letter for each of them because it's separate cases. So don't forget to do that. And I will see you guys in the next one. Take care and be good. I'll see you guys later. Bye.